240 guests were already seated before I found out what my brother's soon-to-be-in-laws really thought of me, and somebody had printed it in gold calligraphy for the whole room to read. It was Saturday, May 17th, 2025, just after 5 in the afternoon, and the light over Heatherbrook Hall in Mount Pleasant. South Carolina was the kind of gold orange that makes everything look like a postcard. Spanish moss hung off the live oaks lining the drive. String lights crisscrossed the lawn. Somewhere behind the main house, a string quartet was tuning up. I stood at the edge of the gravel parking lot in my one good dress, sage green, knee-length, bought on clearance 2 years ago, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely and stupidly happy. My little brother Caleb was getting married. I'd raised that boy. Not helped raise. Raised, our parents died in a car accident on I-26 when I was 20 and he was 10, and there wasn't some big extended family ready to step in. There was me, a part-time job at a grocery store, and a 10-year-old who cried himself to sleep for the better part of a year. I dropped out of community college. I worked doubles. I learned to stretch a pound of ground beef into 4 dinners. I sat through parent-teacher conferences in my work uniform because I didn't have time to change. I co-signed his first loan when he was 22 and trying to start a software company out of a 1-bedroom apartment we shared. Because no bank would touch a kid with no credit history and a business plan scribbled on a legal pad. 18 years, I thought, walking up that gravel path. 18 years and look at him now. Caleb's company, Low Country Freight Technologies, built routing software for trucking and logistics fleets. Boring to explain at a party. But it worked. And it worked well enough that the largest freight company on the South Carolina coast, Callaway Distribution, was 3 days away from signing a 5-year licensing contract worth $42 million. The man who owned Callaway Distribution was named Richard Callaway. His daughter Whitney was the bride. I didn't know yet that the wedding and the business deal were about to become the same fight. A young woman in a headset, the wedding planner's assistant, I'd learn later her name was Gail, checked names off a tablet at the entrance to the reception tent and waved me through with a tight, professional smile. "Cook, table 12, she offered, not quite meeting my eyes. I didn't think anything of it. Table 12 was near the back, by the bar, half shadowed by a column wrapped in white fabric flowers. I found my seat by process of elimination. There was a name card standing in front of every chair, each one a small folded rectangle of heavy cream cardstock with gold script. I picked mine up to set my purse down behind it. That's when I read it. Maya Cook, the uneducated sister who lives off her brother. I read it twice. I genuinely thought, for one absurd second, that it had to be a joke from Caleb, some inside reference, some bit we'd laugh about later. Then I noticed the woman across the table, mid-50s, pearls, watching me with an expression I can only describe as waiting. And I understood. This wasn't a joke between siblings. This was placed. "Oh," she announced, not bothering to lower her voice. "You're that sister." A man beside her, I didn't catch his name, somebody's cousin I'd guess, actually laughed. Not a polite cough laugh. A real one. Head back, like I'd told a good joke at my own expense, without meaning to. "Stand up. Don't make a scene. You don't owe these people your dignity in real time." That's what the rational part of my brain insisted. The rest of me just stood there holding a piece of cardstock with my own humiliation typeset on it in a wedding-appropriate font, while the table kept talking like I wasn't there. Richard wanted everyone to know the family background. The Pearl woman offered to no one in particular, like she was reciting a fact she'd been handed. Caleb's a remarkable success story. Self-made. It's important context for the toasts. Context. They'd turned my life into a punchline so a stranger could feel better about his daughter marrying up. I want to be honest with you, and I think you'll understand this if you've ever been the person who held a family together while it fell apart. For about 4 seconds, I was ready to fold the card into my purse, smile, and survive the night the way I'd survived everything else. Quietly. Alone. It's what I'm good at. Then I felt a hand close around mine. Caleb, tuxedo, boutonniere slightly crooked. The same crooked-toothed grin he'd had since he was 10 years old, standing in a courtroom hallway holding my hand because there was nobody else's hand to hold. He looked down at the card. His face didn't change right away. And then it did, all at once, the way weather changes on the coast. Who wrote this? His voice was very calm. That was the part that scared me. Richard had the seating cards done, Gail blurted, materializing with her tablet, clearly terrified. I print what I'm given, I don't. Caleb was already walking. I followed. Because what else do you do? And the rest of the tent went quiet in that ripple way crowds do when they sense something is about to happen before they know what. We found Richard Calloway near the head table, tall, tan, the kind of man who'd clearly never once in his life had to introduce himself twice. He saw Caleb's face and reached for a smile that didn't land. Caleb. There you are, we were just. You wrote a card calling my sister uneducated. Caleb set it down on the white tablecloth, gently, like he was placing evidence. The woman who paid our rent working a register at 19. Who skipped her own classes so I could finish mine. Who co-signed the loan that started my company. Your future partner's company, Richard. When literally every bank in this state said no. The room had gone properly silent now. Somewhere a fork clinked against a plate and somebody shushed it. It was meant as context, Richard offered, and I watched him reach for the same word the Pearl woman had used, like it had been workshopped in advance. People were going to ask how a man from your background built what you built. I thought it would be more graceful to simply, graceful. Caleb spat the word like it tasted bad. You humiliated her at my wedding to make my success story sound better at your daughter's expense. Welcome back to Sweet Family Revenge. Grab your snacks, get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just chose wrong. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. You're going to love it here. Richard's jaw tightened. I genuinely think, he believed he still had the upper hand, because he glanced at his watch and muttered, low enough that he probably thought only the immediate circle could hear. Caleb. We can discuss this Monday. The contract doesn't change because of a seating chart. That was the wrong thing to say. I felt Caleb's hand tighten around mine. You just made the most expensive mistake of your life, he told him. And you're going to find out exactly how expensive on Monday morning. The room fell dead silent for a few seconds, the kind of silence that has weight, that you feel in your sternum. Somewhere near the back I heard Whitney's voice. Sharp and small. Cut through it, Dad. What did you do? I didn't sleep that night. Neither, I'd find out, did Richard Calloway. Because what neither of them knew yet, what I barely let myself believe, was that the next morning wasn't going to start with an apology. It was going to start with a phone call that would cost Calloway Distribution everything. Sunday, May 18th, 2025. 7:14 in the morning. I was sitting at my brother's kitchen island in yesterday's sage green dress, because I hadn't gone home, when his phone rang for the 4th time in 10 minutes. He let it ring out again. I didn't know yet that he'd been awake since 5, and that he hadn't spent that time being angry. He'd spent it making calls. You don't have to do anything, I told him. I meant it. 18 years of being the responsible one doesn't switch off because somebody finally has my back. It was one bad night. I've survived worse than a rude card. Caleb set 2 mugs of coffee down and looked at me the way he used to look at me when he was 16, and I told him we couldn't afford the basketball camp, like he was deciding whether to argue or just go quietly disappointed. He chose to argue. You didn't survive worse. He countered. You absorbed worse. There's a difference, and I watched you do it for 18 years, and I'm not watching you do it at my own wedding. He slid his phone across the counter, screen up. A draft email, addressed to Callaway Distribution's board. Subject line: Notice of withdrawal. Licensing agreement. Caleb, $42 million, he continued. 5-year exclusive. We were supposed to sign Monday at 11. He tapped the screen. Richard's entire board thinks this deal is finalized. His investors think it's finalized. He told them in a press release in March. 3 days. The whole thing had been 3 days from done. If you pull it, I countered slowly, it doesn't just hurt Richard. It hurts you. It hurts the people who work for you. It hurts me less than watching grown adults laugh at a card with your name on it. He wasn't raising his voice. That was somehow worse. Maya, I've spent 6 years building a company deliberately so nobody could ever talk about us like that again. I'm not signing a 5-year contract with a man who thinks that's who you are. My phone buzzed. A text from Eva, my best friend since high school, who'd been at table 12 2 seats down and had clearly been awake all night too. Girl. Is it true Caleb's pulling the Callaway deal? It's already on the Charleston business page. People are tagging Callaway Distribution. I hadn't even known there was a Charleston business page. I clicked the link with my stomach somewhere near my knees. The post wasn't dramatic. Just 3 lines. No names. Written by some account that covered local commercial news. Sources indicate the high-profile Callaway Distribution / Low Country Freight Technologies licensing deal may be in jeopardy following a personal dispute at a private event this weekend. Callaway Distribution's name was already trending on a regional business account by Sunday morning, with commenters speculating about what personal dispute meant. Private events aren't supposed to make business pages. But Mount Pleasant is a small town with a big tent, and somebody's cousin had clearly talked. At 9:40, Richard called. Caleb put it on speaker, which I think was deliberate. He wanted me to hear it directly, not filtered through him. Caleb, let's not be hasty. Richard's voice had lost its wedding toast smoothness. What happened with the seating card was poor judgment on my part. I'll apologize to your sister personally. But pulling out of a signed letter of intent over a card, it's not about the card, Richard. Caleb's tone didn't shift. It's about what the card told me. You think my sister is beneath this family. You think her sacrifice is a punchline you can print for your guests. I'm not going to spend the next 5 years building your fleet's infrastructure while you treat her like the help. I have 40 drivers whose routes depend on this software going live in August, Richard admitted. And for the first time, I heard something under the smoothness. Fear. This isn't just my deal. Caleb, there are people downstream of this. That landed. I watched it land on Caleb's face too. Then here's your option, Caleb stated. One option. You issue a written apology to my sister, not to me, to her, in front of the same people who laughed at that table, and you personally fund a scholarship in her name at Harborview High School, where she should have been able to finish her own diploma on time instead of getting her GED at 23 between shifts. You do that, publicly, by Wednesday. Or, the deal is gone, and I sign with Palmetto Route Systems Monday at 11 instead, like they've been asking me to for the last 4 months. Silence on the line. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. You've been talking to Palmetto, Richard murmured finally, quietly, like a man realizing he'd misjudged the whole board. I've had options the whole time, Richard. I picked you because Whitney loves you, and I wanted this to work for everyone. A pause. You made it about my sister. So now it's about my sister. He hung up. I sat there for a second in the quiet of Caleb's kitchen, watching steam come off coffee neither of us was drinking, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel in the middle of all this. Not vindication. Not yet. Just a strange, hollow disbelief that anyone had ever put my whole life into a sentence small enough to fit on a name card, and that my little brother had refused, instantly and completely, to let it stand. I didn't know yet how far Richard Callaway would actually go to save the deal, or that his own daughter was about to make sure he didn't have a choice. At 11 a.m., Whitney showed up at Caleb's door alone, still in her travel clothes from the honeymoon they hadn't left for yet. Mascara smudged, looking like she hadn't slept any more than we had. "I need you to know I didn't see that card before it went out," she blurted, the second the door opened. "My father told the planner it was family context. I thought it meant, I don't know what I thought it meant. I should have checked." "I'm so sorry, Maya," I believed her. There was something in her face that wasn't performance. It was the quiet exhaustion of someone realizing their parent isn't who they've spent their whole life assuming he was. "He's downstairs telling the board it was a miscommunication," she continued. "He's trying to spin it as a typo." Her voice cracked slightly. "It wasn't a typo. I heard him workshop the wording with my mother on Thursday." That detail, workshopped on Thursday, sat in the room like a dropped plate. Caleb's jaw set. Thursday, 2 days before the wedding. "Premeditated. I'm telling you because I think you deserve to know exactly what you're dealing with," Whitney finished. "And because I'm not going to spend my marriage pretending my father's version of events is the real one." By that afternoon, Richard had called 4 more times. Caleb let 3 go to voicemail. The 4th he answered, and this time it wasn't Richard threatening the deal. It was Richard. For the first time, he was sounding like a man who understood he'd already lost the leverage he thought he had. "What exactly," he asked carefully, "would it take to fix this?" Caleb looked at me across the kitchen island. He didn't answer right away. He wanted, I think, for the answer to be mine. "Monday," I told him. "Not Wednesday." Monday morning, before the contract signing, in front of the same people. And he means it. Not a press release. Not a statement his lawyer wrote. Caleb relayed it word for word. There was a long pause on the other end. Monday, Richard agreed finally. "I'll be there." I didn't know yet whether he'd actually show up, or whether $42 million was the only language that had ever truly made Richard Calloway listen to anyone. Monday, May 19th, 2025, 10:40 a.m. The same tent at Heatherbrook Hall, half disassembled. Folding chairs stacked along one wall. The gold name cards long since thrown away by the cleanup crew, except for one, which I'd kept, folded once and tucked into my purse, because some things you hold on to so you remember exactly how far you've come from where someone tried to put you. I hadn't expected to be back here 20 hours after I thought I'd never set foot in this tent again. But Caleb wanted the apology to happen in the room where the insult had. His words. So the room remembers both. Richard Calloway stood near the head table, where he'd told Caleb the deal didn't change because of a seating chart. About 30 people were there. Not the full wedding crowd, but the board members, Whitney, Pamela Calloway looking like she hadn't slept either, Eva standing next to me with her arms crossed like a bodyguard. I didn't know yet that this morning would end with Richard Calloway, of all people, being the one who finally said my own story back to me correctly. "I owe Maya Cook an apology," Richard started. And I watched him stumble on the first sentence, like the words physically didn't want to come out in this order. Not a corporate one. A real one. He looked at me directly. To his credit, and I'll give him this much, he didn't flinch away from it. "I made assumptions about you based on a 5-minute conversation we had at the engagement party last year, where you mentioned working retail in your 20s. I decided that was the whole story. I never asked what came before it, or why. I should have asked. Short, punchy, true, I'll admit it landed somewhere I didn't expect. You raised your brother alone," he continued. "You put your own education on hold to do it. You co-signed a loan with no safety net so he could build something that's now worth more than my entire fleet. And I had a card printed calling you uneducated and a burden. At the one event in your life where you should have been celebrated as the reason any of this exists at all." He stopped. Swallowed. "I'm sorry. Genuinely. Not because I'm losing $42 million if I'm not, though I won't pretend that isn't also true, But because my daughter looked at me yesterday like she didn't recognize me. And she was right not to. The Harborview High School Scholarship Fund, it turned out, was already filed by Monday morning, $10,000 a year, indefinitely, for a graduating senior who'd had to leave school to support family. Richard had set it up Sunday night. Whether that was guilt or strategy, I genuinely don't know, and at a certain point I decided it didn't matter which. The scholarship would help some kid in 2026 who was living some version of what I lived in 2007, and that mattered more than untangling Richard's motives. I finished my GED at 23, I told the room, because I figured if my story was going to be public anyway, it should at least be accurate. Worked the overnight shift, studied in the break room. It took me 3 more years to get an associate's degree at the community college, one class at a time. Because that's what fit around raising a 10-year-old. I'm not embarrassed by that path. I built it on purpose. Caleb signed the contract at 11, like he'd planned to all along, not because Richard had groveled enough, he told me later, but because the apology was specific, and witnessed, and tied to something real instead of a press release. I needed to know he understood what he did, Caleb explained. Not that he was sorry he got caught. I want to tell you the ending wasn't really about the money, even though $42 million is, objectively, an enormous number to hang a wedding story on. The ending was smaller than that, and somehow bigger. It was Whitney, 3 weeks later at a much quieter family dinner, handing me a new place card she'd made herself. Plain white cardstock, simple black ink, no gold calligraphy at all. It read, Maya Cook. The reason Caleb is who he is. I keep that one too. It's in the same drawer as the other, the one with my name spelled right and nothing else. If you liked this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more family-centered accounts like this.